unfortunately, with this weather, we tend to, with the weather, we tend to sort of back off and hesitate. But there's still time to start some of your seeds. Peppers, maybe not. Tomatoes were kind of right on that, you can still start them now, I suppose, but they'll be a little bit later. But certainly if you're wanting to start other things that you know normally could start directly in the garden, you can start some of them early, such as your peas or your start lettuce inside early. And then my lettuce is out in the garden right now, but you can start some things. Carrots don't like to be transplanted, so I wouldn't be starting any carrots by seed indoors other than leaving them right in the garden. But we'll go through this presentation, and if you have any questions, just leave them to the end and then we will discuss them then. But how to get your things started. So let me see if I can, and I'll make it full screen here. Okay. So get to the beginning. I was just going through that. So starting your plants from seed. So what is needed? Of course, you're going to have soil. And if you want really good seedlings, you need really good soil. Yes, you can buy the cheaper stuff, but you're going to have seedlings that aren't going to produce quite as well because your soil and your light are crucial for starting these little seeds, these little seedlings. Now, the function of the soil, it anchors the plant's root system, of course. It gives the somewhere for that seed to germinate, get that root system going before it shoots up the little plant. It also supplies nutrients. Even though the seed itself provides nutrients for that very tiny seedling when it germinates, but the soil also stores water for the plant growth. The seed doesn't provide water, but the soil will. So once it's germinated, that soil needs water, not too much, because with a small seedling, it's very, very easy to overwater. So you really need to be careful with that. Now I'm getting a bit of echoing. I'm hoping not everyone's getting that. But the soil also supplies oxygen. So that's why a good soil that is really well aerated is very good for the seedlings so that they get the oxygen as well as the water that they need. So your soil mixture must provide good drainage. So if you do have soil that you're not sure of, and it should be pasteurized, don't go out to the garden and dig up soil to bring indoors to start your seeds. You want pasteurized soil. So that comes in a bag that you've gone out to purchase. And ProMix, in my opinion, is the best. There's different companies that make it, but it should say ProMix on it. And it provides that good drainage. It has that good water retention. It's lightweight. And as I say, it's pasteurized. And it is basically peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite. So the commercial soilless mix, and don't worry about that, but there's a Jiffy Mix or the ProMix, and Ready Earth is another name that you might be looking for. But for me, it is the best, and any of your growers are going to use this ProMix for anything that they're using for starting seeds or their annuals or their hanging baskets or whatever. It's always in a ProMix. It's very lightweight. It's pasteurized, so there's no weed seeds or bacteria. It's been heat processed, so that is no longer an issue, but it's the perfect thing for starting your seeds. Now, peat moss is a bit of a sore spot. We're depleting all our peat bogs. So there's other alternatives that people are looking into. They're not as readily available as they should, but the core is, it generally comes in a compressed blocks or bricks. And then the rice hulls, that core is more like the shell of like a coconut or that kind of thing. It's a shell type product that has been processed down. So it's very much like a peat moss. And then rice hulls are another thing that are becoming a little more well known, that work very well as an alternative to these pro mixes that have the peat moss. So they're trying to find alternatives so you're not using peat moss because we use it in such great quantities. So for containers, you don't have to go out and buy all these fancy things. And it does add up when you go out and buy the cell packs and buy the trays and buy the Jiffy Sevens, if that what you're using. At my house, I use those little containers that tomatoes might come in, or maybe croissants come in. They're like a plastic clamshell type container. I find they're the best. Here you can see these are reusable containers that might have had, some beverage in them. But using newspaper, strips of newspaper and winding them into little pots is ideal. Egg cartons, perfect. Eggshells, if you're pretty good on breaking your eggshells so that you have some sort of a little container there. Paper towel or toilet paper tubes are excellent by folding the bottom up, and then you can fill them with soil and use them for starting your seeds. Because again, you're not wanting a large container to start your seeds. You want a container that will sustain that little seedling until it gets to a certain size, and then you can pot it directly outside if the weather is suitable, or you're going to put it into a larger container to grow it on. But yogurt cups are excellent, poking holes in the bottom. Paper coffee cups, for our master gardeners, we're growing heirloom tomatoes, and we put them in paper coffee cups with holes in the bottom, and they're fine. To-go containers, seed pot trays, anything that you can recycle, to me, is a much better way of dealing with things. So your seeds, you're going to buy them probably in little packets, unless you're getting them from friends or what have you. But read the packaging, because there's a lot of information on those packages on what is needed for that particular seed. Most seeds like to be covered, but some seeds do not. So you need to know that, so you don't cover them, because they won't germinate if you do cover them, or it'll be a very poor germination rate. Now, soaking seeds, not everyone does. I like to soak my seeds for about 24 hours before I seed them in my containers, but that's not always necessary. Some that might germinate better for you would be like your sweet peas, anemones, morning glories, parsley, lupins. These tend to be a little harder to germinate, and by soaking them, it softens up the seed coat so that they'll germinate at a better rate, or more consistency. So stratification, now this is just a word, and for most of our vegetable garden seeds, you don't need to worry, but some seeds have such a hard coat that you nick them or put them over sandpaper or whatever to break through this hard seed coat, or giving them a moisture and cold treatment. Some of your native plants have to have that sort of cold freeze treatment before they will germinate. And lavender, phlox, columbine are some that you have to treat that way. But for most of our vegetables, we don't have to worry. So be sure to never stratify seeds while they're still in their package. Make sure they're out of their package, and then, either soak them in paper towel if that's what you wish, or I just put mine in water and then drain them, and then I sow them that way. Like I said earlier, some plants don't like to be transplanted. So these are the ones that you want to directly seed into the garden, so you don't put them in a pot and then transplant them, unless it's a pot that's a peat pot that's going to disintegrate in the garden. You're not physically taking them out of the pot. And carrots are very good. Anything that has sort of a tap root, carrots, parsley, cilantro. Now, squash, I've transplanted squash and it's been fine, as have I with spinach. Radishes, they're pretty good if you transplant them when they're fairly young. But anything with these longer roots, the carrots, parsley, and cilantro, be very careful about transplanting them because they really don't, unless you get them really, really young, they don't respond well to that. So planting, you want to start off by moistening your soil, not soaking it, but moistening it. I always have basins where I'm mixing the soil with the water, and then I'm going to fill my cell or pots or whatever you're using, your recycled containers. You're going to fill them up and then just tamp them down ever so slightly. I was at a Bite of Brant and teaching kids about planting seeds, and that tamping down, I would have them take the back of their hands to just firm the soil, and you'd get that young person that went, "Oh, tap, you mean smash it to the bottom of the pot?" Well, no, we had to work very hard on no, gentle patting of the soil. And then you scatter your seeds on that container. And this is one way of doing it, but um, we'll talk about the other way. But so you're sprinkling your seeds on the top of that soil and then covering the seeds with another layer of soil, depending on the size of the seed. If it's a very tiny seed, it's a very light covering. If it's a larger seed, then you're going to put a little more cover on it. And then I gently pat it down again so that I have really good soil and seed contact. And that's important because if it was light and fluffy, there might be air pockets in there that will dry the seed out. So germination won't happen. So once I've covered it and patted it down gently, I'll then mist it with a spray bottle so that that top surface is very, very moist. And I know the bottom surface is moist because I've wet it before I put it in that container. And then I'm going to put clear plastic dome on the top of it, or a plastic film or glass or whatever. And I'm going to put it in a warm location. I have a heat mat, but as you can see in this picture, this is just sort of a frame that has a inexpensive light underneath of it. And that light would be enough to provide that heat, that bottom heat for germination. You really only need about 78 degrees up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever that is in centimeters. And that is ideal for germinating. If it's cool, the germination process takes much longer. So here I'll put a plastic dome over it, or the picture that we had seen before. You've got already plastic dome on top of your recycled containers. Even though there's a hole in the middle, that's not going to matter that much. So that's going to, I'll just let them sit. They don't need light at this point. Seeds do not need light to germinate. They just need warmth and moisture. So even putting a newspaper over top of that plastic cover helps sort of keep it, you know, prevents the soil from drying out a little bit. Whereas light in that plastic could dry the soil a little bit. But make sure you label it. Labeling is one of those things you think, yeah, I'm not going to forget what I seeded. And before long, you've got 8 or 10 containers. You're going, oh, I don't remember now which one is that. And put the date that you started it, the date that you planted it, so that you have a general idea of when that germination should happen. So if you've planted it on March 30th, let's say, you know that it's tomatoes. It shouldn't take any more than maybe 8 to 10 days to see it germinate. You have an idea. So that bottom heat is very important. And again, here is just sort of a wooden shelf. Again, that light underneath that would be just enough to give a little bit of bottom heat. What some people do if they do have the lights, the baluses where with their fluorescents, is they'll put their seeds up on top until they germinate. And once they do germinate, then you put them down under the lights. But that ballast would, that ballast would provide enough heat to help with the germination on top. But as I say, once they do germinate, and you're seeing this, once you just see that little sprout showing green, the top comes off and it goes under the light 6 inches. And we'll talk a little bit more about the different lights, but again, 6 inches is ideal. Even these little seedlings, you can see where my cursor, they're kind of stretching a little more than they need to be. They really should be closer to those lights. So once they've germinated, once you've got those little shoots coming up, they require warmer daytime temperatures. So they may not need 78, but maybe 75, and then cooler night temperatures. And that would be ideal. And the light that they're under should be on for 14 to 16 hours a day. And it's important. Now, right now, our light levels are higher. You could probably start seeds on a windowsill if it's a south or east or west facing window. You could probably do okay. But prior to April, we really don't have enough light, and that's when you get your seedlings really stretching and becoming leggy. So light is most important at this time, sufficient light. And you can always tell a seedling that has had the adequate light. They're short, they're squatty versus a seedling. My daughter just received some seedlings from a friend, and the stem of the seedling had to be 6 inches, and then the little true leaves at the top. And she says, "What can I do?" Toss them out. They're not going to be able to do anything at that point. They're way too leggy. So light should be about 6 inches away from the top of the seedlings, and then you leave the lights on for 12, 14 to 16 hours a day. That 12 is a little bit, you could certainly bump that up to 14 hours. Now, the fertilizing, these little seedlings, the seed coat that the embryo where the seed has germinated from, it provides them with a little bit of nutrient. But once they start to grow and start to photosynthesize, they're going to need to be fertilized probably that first week, but a weak solution. I like 20-20-20, like a balanced fertilizer or a 10-10-10, one that has even numbers, and dilute it quite a bit, and never ever fertilize them when they're dry. Always moisten them first, and then maybe the next day fertilize. And that will work well. And then I fertilize them about every 2 weeks because my little seedlings are up about 3 to 4 inches. So about every 2 weeks, I'm fertilizing them to give them that nutrient they need. So the light, most important, and this is, I won't go, too much into this, but the plants do need that full spectrum of the red-blue waves, which energizes the chlorophyll. But it's so important that they have that light. And if you are using fluorescents, now LEDs, I'm not as knowledgeable about those because I have the grow lights with the fluorescents. These tubes should be changed every 2 years. Even one of our master gardeners is saying, "I didn't know that. It was still illuminating and it's still bright." And it is, but the quality of light after 2 years for your plants is not adequate. So then your seedlings start slanting into the center of the fluorescent tubes, and they can get leggy, even though you've got them 6 inches under the light. The center would be fine, but it's the ends of those tubes that are depleting the quality of light. So every 2 years, those fluorescent.
Nancy, Nancy,
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but it keeps cutting in and out when you're talking.
Oh, maybe I should be sitting closer to the computer then.
Sorry. Yeah, like when you're closer, it does sound a little bit better. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have checked my
That's
my
okay.
speakers, but it should be fine. So I'm just saying that with the fluorescent tubes, they should be changed every 2 years for the quality of light to sustain your seedlings properly, or they will get leggy or they'll start sloping to the center. So here's some different options of light. Again, this is more of an upright with a plastic covering, which is ideal. It maintains the temperature and keeps the moisture level in for the seedlings. Having some sort of a thermometer so that you can tell what your temperature is, so you can open that up if it gets too hot or close it when it starts to cool a bit. And again, these are very typical with the baluses for the fluorescent tubes, and then your plants are underneath of that. These are the little containers that I was talking about that I like to use and recycle. And then I've got my lights over top of that. What you see in the right-hand corner, these seedlings are way too leggy. The stem is way too long and these aren't even true leaves on the end. These are still the cotyledon leaves, those ones that they germinated with. Here it looks like a true leaf, but they're way too long, way too long. They will be very difficult to support any growth later on once they have been put out into the garden. If it's a tomato, sometimes you can get away with it by burying the stem, but if it's a pepper or eggplant or any flower plants, they're going to be way too leggy and not perform well for you. Here in the two, this one's a little bit leggy, but this one isn't too bad at all. This is kind of a nice size. You can see good root system on there. A nice little seedling. So pricking off. Now, this is a step that a lot of people will avoid. What I do with mine is I will broadcast my seeds. So in my little container that might be 4 inches by 4 inches, I might have 30, 35 little seedlings sprouting. So they're not going to maintain themselves in that small container. So when they get up to about an inch, they've got their true leaves. So the first one's the cotyledon leaf. The next leaf is the true leaf to the plant. I'm then going to prick them off. So I'm now moving them into a bigger container or a cell pack or whatever, or my coffee cups. So I transplant the seedlings that have outgrown the cell packs or the containers that I've sown them in. I've moistened the soil and I filled that container. Then you can see over here, it's this may be just a pen, but it works the same way. The technical term is a dipper stick. You're just digging out your little seedling. You're holding it by the leaf. Because if for some reason that leaf comes off, the plant is still fine. If you grabbed it by the stem and the stem broke, you've lost your plant. So you grab it by the leaf, you dig it out of your initial grow container, and then you're going to transplant it into its new pot or cup or whatever it is you're going to use. And there it's going to grow until you're ready to put it out into the garden. It's another step, but for me, I like it because my grow lights are not that big. I can start a lot of little containers with 35 seedlings in each container, and then I can transplant them into the larger containers where I move them out to the greenhouse. Some people will just put 2 or 3 seeds in each cup, and then when they germinate, they'll just cut off the smaller ones and let one grow. So it depends what you're used to. So lightly hold the plant by the leaf as you're transplanting it. Never hold it by the stem. And once you've pricked out carefully, water the seedlings in using the rose or a fine nozzle. just so you're not washing that little seedling out. You want it to be like a fine rain type situation. Keep the seedling shaded for a day or two until that root system has a chance to establish itself, and make sure you don't overwater them because you have a little root system at this stage with a fairly large quantity of soil. So you don't want that soil to be moistened too often because then the roots will rot. So pricking off, this is just some pictures. Here they are ready to be pricked off, where you can see my cursor, and then I'm going to move them into these little cell packs. This is just sort of a little device that pokes the holes into your pots or cell packs so that you can just prick off fairly quickly. And then once you've got them transplanted into their individual pots, you do that gentle rain on them and water them in. It settles the soil and gets that root system moist so that they can establish themselves a little faster. So the last thing you need to do once you've got your little seedlings growing and doing well, before you put them in the garden, you need to harden them off. By having seedlings growing indoors in your greenhouse or lovely window or wherever it is, we call it the winter leaves. And that's fine. They're, you know, they're protected. It's warm. It's not too windy. It's lovely conditions. You take them outside to plant them in the garden. They don't have a chance to develop their summer leaves. And it takes a little while, a couple of days, for the cells inside the leaves to reposition themselves so they don't burn from the sun or burn from the wind. So what you do usually about a week or two before you're ready to plant in the garden is you take them outside during the day for maybe 2 or 3 hours, bring them in at night. Next day, maybe it's 5 hours, and you've got them in a shadier location. And then bring them in at night, take them out for 5 hours, bring them in at night. Maybe the next day, a little more light for 6 hours, bring them in at night. And in about 2 weeks, you can leave them out day and night, as long as our temperature is not dipping down to freezing. You certainly wouldn't do that now with the lovely snow that we've been having. But at that point, they're going to be hardened off. So when they do go in the garden, if we get a cool night at the end of May, they won't even notice it. They'll be hardened off and ready to go, and they won't miss a stem. So this is a stage that some people ignore, and then their plants get a chill and they'll just sit for maybe a week or two before they reestablish. And then that way they're behind. Where if you've been hardened off, your seedlings will never miss a beat. They'll just be ready to go. So are there any questions? I'll stop sharing here. Are there any questions that I can answer for you about starting your seeds? Has anyone started seeds? Can I sort of see a thumbs up or yes, we've got that. Great.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Are there any alternates to peat moss pots that you can still, you don't have to transplant, those still like disintegrate into the soil?
Definitely. So your newspaper pots where you do strips of newspaper and sort of wind them around. So you're making almost like a toilet paper roll, but with newspaper, and then you squish the bottom so that, you know, it's not bottomless, and put soil in that, and that will just disintegrate in the garden. You can tear it a little bit if you wish to speed that along. But they do disintegrate. Same with your, as long as it's not styrofoam, but your egg cartons, the cardboard egg cartons, they'll disintegrate as well. When they get wet, they'll get pretty flimsy and disintegrate. Not the styrofoam, of course. Eggshells are pretty good. You'd have to crack those, like, I mean, break them apart before you set them down in the ground. But they would be good too, especially tomatoes. They're going to add that calcium and help prevent that black bottom, that black rot on the bottom of your tomatoes that sometimes we get. Are the seedlings we pick up from EGCG on the May long weekend hardened off? I guess Cheryl or someone else can answer that.
Yes. The easy question is yes. The
Yes.
ones that are donated come from a nursery and from our city greenhouse, and the ones that I grow are hardening off right now. You can see the fan
Good.
going at the top. That's part of that work. And when it's sunny out, I throw them outside for an hour
Yeah.
or two.
Great. Yes, no, that's important. And most growers do harden them off. They will just open up the greenhouses and provide that direct light and cooler weather to harden those leaves off so that they'll arrive to you in good shape. Any other questions?
Nancy, I
Yeah.
don't know. Sorry, Alicia had a question. It was something about she said, I was gifted some seeds I've never used. They have some type of coating on them that apparently states quick growth. She's just wondering if they would be planted like the same way that she's previously done.
Yes, they would. Some people or some seed companies will have almost like a clay protection on them. That's not always for speeding up the germination, but for easy handling. If you're doing mass productions with farmers, they'll sometimes have like seeders, and it protects the seed. But any seed that you get with any coating, you would treat it just like you would any other seed and plant it in the same method. Seeds with a chemical, usually they're a pink or a sort of a weird color. Use gloves. Use gloves when you're working with seeded seeds. Okay, any other questions? You're welcome.
Okay, if that's it for questions, again, thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate it, taking your time out of an evening to join us. I learned a lot, so hopefully you guys did too. Just a quick reminder, April 23rd, which is this Saturday, right? The 23rd? Yes, we are doing a bottle drive. It's our first one of the year. If you have any empties left over from the weekend, let us know and we will figure something out. Or you can drop them off, email us at ecogrounds@gmail.com for the address. And then also thank you so much, Nancy. It was so nice to see you again. It's always just so
Yes, nice seeing
knowledgeable.
you
So thank
too.
you. And then we will be back. I know I